Hello, and welcome to today's meeting of the International Schiller Institute, the Oasis Plan, the LaRouche Solution for Peace Through Development between Israel and Palestine and for all Southwest Asia. My introduction to Panel 1 of our conference, Creating the Conditions for Dialogue, Security, Peace, and Development in Southwest Asia, will be provided by a special guest, the co-founder of the Schiller Institute, the late economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche. Now, this is taken from a speech that LaRouche delivered on June 2nd, 2002, at the Zayed Center for Coordination and Follow-Up in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. This was from the first day of a two-day conference on the role of oil and gas in world politics. Now, as you will see, it is as if he had prepared those remarks for this day, and in a true sense, he actually did.
The world has come to a crossroads in modern history. If the world were to continue along the pathway currently chosen by my government and some others, civilization will be plunged for as long as a generation or more into a global dark age comparable to that which struck Europe 7.5 centuries ago. We must not pretend that that danger does not exist. We must commit ourselves to the hopeful alternative, which wise governments would prefer. Therefore, I should speak frankly but optimistically of a second crossroad, the Middle East. For as far back in history as we know, as civilization reaches, long before the strategic crossroads of Eurasia of discovery war, the Middle East has been the crossroads of Eurasia and Africa combined, as it is today. With or without petroleum, the historic strategic significance of the Middle East to itself and to the world will continue. Given the desperate situation of the world today, we cannot be so naive as to presume that powers which may be great, or even simply powerful, will react sanely to the relevant strategic facts of the situation. I focus on the subject of oil, but do that within the context of the historically determined strategic options for a Middle East which is defined in its ancient and continuing role as a crucial strategic crossroads of Asia, of Eurasia, and Africa. Zoom in as if from an orbiting space station upon the crass and present ecology of this region of the world's biosphere. In our imagination, let us watch the long-range historical process of the melting of the Great Eurasian Glacier over the interval from about 19,000 years ago, when ocean levels were approximately 400 feet below the present those today. Watch the evolution of the Mediterranean region over the following millennia. Watch the later phase of the great desiccation of the once rich desert regions of Sahara, the Gulf, and Central Asia. From the standpoint of that lapsed time panorama, we are reminded in the most useful way of a fact we already know, that the most critical of the strategic economic factors inside the Middle East region as a whole is not petroleum, but fresh water.
If you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's meeting of the International Schiller Institute, the Oasis Plan, the LaRouche Solution for Peace Through Development between Israel and Palestine and for all Southwest Asia. This is Panel 1 of the conference, and you've just heard from the late economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche, speaking at a conference in 2002. We thank Lyndon LaRouche for that vision. We hope that this conference will provide the impetus and the intellectual means to bring that vision to fruition. It is now my honor and pleasure to introduce the convener and keynote speaker for today's Panel 1, the founder and leader of the International Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Welcome, Helga.
Welcome, Helga. Hello. Greetings to all of you from the many different countries, from wherever you may be listening now. We are organizing this Oasis conference to inject a perspective of hope and show a way out of an otherwise desperate, extremely dangerous, and indeed catastrophic situation in Southwest Asia. if we don't replace this present escalation, which could rapidly turn into a full-fledged regional war, turning into a global nuclear war, it could mean the end of the human species on this planet. In order to avoid that, the short-term danger, what is needed is a cognitive jump to conceptualize an entirely different approach, namely to define the economic and security self-interest of the Palestinians, the Arabs in general, as well as the Israelis, and then the neighboring countries in the larger region. Why am I saying this? What has happened in the last 6 months is unprecedented in all of history. A genocide which is happening in real time is transmitted live from the battlefield in Gaza to the TV sets in the living rooms of the world audience. So while in the first instance after the Hamas attack October 7th on Israeli villages causing 1,200 deaths, the sympathy of much of the world was with Israel. That changed day by day, week by week, month by month. Billions of people could watch with their own eyes, unfiltered by commentators and narrative authors. And what they saw was not a measured counter-reaction by a country under attack, but a relentless ethnic cleansing in a sealed, tiny territory by one of the most highly technologically equipped military forces in the world, using artificial intelligence for targeting of Hamas fighters, and at the same time denying water, food, medical care, electricity, housing, clothing, sanitation, etc., to an entirely unarmed population. So far, the casualties of the Palestinian side are around 33,400, of which 17,000 are children. That is 44% of all killed are children. And more than 1 billion are starving to death acutely. That is why there have been hundreds of thousands in the streets in Islamic countries, in American and European cities, and in the universities. In the aftermath of the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, US CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla is presently visiting Israel, where he met with IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi and Defense Minister Gallant, and visited Air Force command centers as well as the air bases. Western media is buzzing about a possible Iranian strike on a variety of targets in Israel as early as today or 2 days from now. This morning, Netherlands closed its embassy in Tehran. Lufthansa cancelled flights to Iran until next Thursday, and the Foreign Office of Germany has called for all German citizens to leave the country. It's clearly a hair-trigger situation, which in the worst case could turn into a regional and even global war. Despite this escalation, and all the more because of it, it is therefore of the utmost urgency that a completely different approach is being introduced, namely the so-called Oasis Plan, which was proposed in 1975 by my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche. It is based on the idea to create an incentive for both the Palestinians and the Israelis to replace the present feelings of deep injury, pain, and despair for some, and hatred for others, with a perspective of a common economic development for the creation of a better future for all generations to come. For the Palestinians, it is of vital importance for their existence, and for the Israelis, they should listen to those who are warning them about the change in the perception of the world, such as Ami Ayalon, the former director of the Shin Bet, during the time of the Oslo Accords. In an article in the current issue of Foreign Affairs, he warns Israel that following the IDF attack on food trucks on February 29th, killing 112 people and wounding 760 who were desperately trying to obtain the food that could save them from starvation, and the attack on the 7 World Central Kitchen workers eradicated the legitimacy of the war in the eyes of the world. That it is seen no longer as a war of self-defense, but as an act of expansionist aggression. Furthermore, Ayalon writes that Israel cannot win by eliminating the Hamas leadership, since that would not make the Hamas ideology disappear. That is an understatement of the year. Even if the present crisis would not lead to a global annihilation of the entire human species, in which obviously also Israel would vanish, if the cycle of violence is not interrupted once and for all, the future for all will be a hell, in which one war will follow the next, as we have seen during the last 75 years, always naturally feeding the various arm producers of the growing military-industrial complexes. What we propose, therefore, is the updated version of the Oasis Plan first introduced by Lyndon LaRouche in 1975, which he proposed after attending a celebration of the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, attended by many leaders of the non-aligned movement. For anyone visiting Southwest Asia, the most striking experience is the overwhelming presence of the desert, the obvious shortage of water, especially fresh water. It is also clear that the requirements for the water consumption of any population, Israeli or Arab, for a modern living standard cannot be satisfied from the existing natural water resources. Furthermore, in all of the military conflicts so far, the lack of water and the efforts to control the access to water played a decisive role. The existing aquifers in the region do not provide even approximately sufficient water. Therefore, even a fair sharing agreement would not solve the problem. In order to create large amounts of fresh water, new water, a variety of methods must be deployed. The most obvious to begin with are several canals connecting the Mediterranean with the Dead Sea and the Dead Sea with the Red Sea. Because of the difference in altitude, the Dead Sea is about 400 meters below the Mediterranean. This allows for hydropower generation. But if one creates an additional canal from the Gulf of Aqaba to the Dead Sea, and then link the two canals by a cross canal, something else is possible. The basic idea is to increase the size of the canals sufficiently to allow for large-scale desalination projects along the banks of the canals with the aid of a number of nuclear power plants. Because of the breakthroughs in technology in the recent decades, the availability of the fourth-generation pebble bed reactor, the high-temperature reactor that was originally developed by Professor Schulten in Jülich, Germany, and which is produced now by China, the safety concerns have been solved. There is also the option of using the thorium cycle reactors, which are uniquely usable for civilian consumption of nuclear energy. One could build a significant number of 300 megawatt electricity plants, what used to be called nuplexes or duplexes, along the canals, providing fresh water for large-scale irrigation, for reforestation, agriculture, the building of transport infrastructure, and new cities. Even if the cost of producing fresh water from desalination of salt water with nuclear energy is relatively high, the economic benefit from the enormous economic activity generated this way in areas where there was absolutely none before is orders of magnitude larger than the amount originally spent. It is the unique power of human labor that with the help of science and technology, it adds value to the process so that the outcome of work is always higher in terms of value than all the elements which went into it. The energy flux density used in this determines the ratio of the added value. So it really pays for itself. One should therefore not only look at the projects mentioned here so far, but have the vision of how this region can look in 1, 2, 3, 4 generations from now. Take as an example China, which has in the last 30 years greened several desert areas successfully. The Chinese economist Dr. Ding Yifan describes in his new book, The New Dynamic of Development, how nearly 1/3 of the hop desert in the Inner Mongolia has efficiently been treated and has become an economic cluster of desert tourism, food, and photovoltaics, and how in the Sekangba, not far from Beijing, thousands of hectares of forests have been restored, and how on the border between Shanxi and the Inner Mongolia in the Mawusu Desert, 30% of the desert are now covered with vegetation, and soil erosion has ceased, and the newly reclaimed farmland has reached 1.6 million acres, generating tremendous economic benefit for local farmers. Dr. Ding Yifan reports that Eric Solheim, UN Undersecretary and UNEP Executive Director, praised the hop desert model, which provides excellent experience for other countries and regions that face desertification problems, and that China's experience in sand control can also spread to Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. In order to conceptualize a vision of development for the entire region, from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, and how that area can develop as a future hub between Asia, Africa, and Europe, one should imagine the infrastructure density, for example, of Germany, where you have an integrated system of highways, railways, water systems, which represent the precondition for advanced industrial development and agriculture. There is no objective reason why Southwest Asia cannot achieve a comparable level in the future. If the looming war can be avoided, the tectonic change which is taking place in the world today, where the countries of the global south are already working to create a new economic system, can create the conditions for the full development of Southwest Asia. Russia, China, India, Iran, the United Emirates, and Egypt are already members of the BRICS. Saudi Arabia is a candidate. Others, like Turkey, have indicated an intent to join. If all these countries would agree to develop to the development perspective of the Oasis Plan and convene a comprehensive Southwest Asia conference on an emergency basis in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, the present looming catastrophe can be avoided and the crisis turned into the beginning of a new era of peace and development. Henry Kissinger, who pretended to be an expert on the Westphalian Order, actually grossly misunderstood it by insisting that it requires a balancing power, namely an unipolar policeman. He claimed that the Westphalian system never applied fully to the Middle East, since only Turkey, Egypt, and Iran had a historical basis, while the borders of the other states would reflect the arbitrariness of the victors of World War I. He obviously was referring to the intent for future manipulations of the Sykes-Picot Treaty. That is why the world must return to the actual Peace of Westphalia and establish a new international security and development architecture which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. That new architecture must emphatically include Russia, China, the US, as well as a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. According to the Cost of War project of the Watson Institute at the Brown University in Rhode Island, In the 20 years from 9/11 in 2001 until 2021, the US military expenditures including collateral costs were $8 trillion, which was spent for military and counterterrorism measures in 85 countries, not including US Special Operation Forces, CIA operations, military information support operations, psychological operations, etc. In the same period, more than 940,000 people have been killed by direct war violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Pakistan, and the number of civilians who have died as a result of indirect causes is significantly higher. If that amount of money, $8 trillion, would have been invested in programs to overcome poverty and underdevelopment, the world would be today a prosperous garden, and the United States would be a celebrated friend of humanity. I can already hear the critics who say that this perspective of an Oasis Plan as the starting point for a new international security and development architecture in the spirit of the Encyclica Populorum Progressio of Pope Paul VI is not realistic, or even worse, completely utopian. When Friedrich Schiller wrote his trilogy Wallenstein about the powerful warlord of the 30 Years' War, he portrayed Wallenstein not in the way the handed-down historic interpretation characterized him, but as a man who really wanted to end the war and reach peace. In the play, Schiller puts the vision of the Peace of Westphalia, which was reached 16 years later, in the mouth of Max Piccolomini, the fiancé of Wallenstein's daughter Thekla. In a conversation with his father and a representative of the Vienna court, Questenberg, Max says, "You make him, Wallenstein, an indignant man, and God knows to what even more, because he spares the Saxons, seeks to inspire confidence in the enemy, which is the only way to peace. For if war does not end in war, where then shall peace come from?" That is the whole idea. For if war does not end in war, where then shall peace come from? To inspire confidence in the enemy, that is the only way to peace. At the abyss of what could become the end of all life on the planet, are we, mankind, the creative species, and can we find a solution out of this danger? So let us put the Oasis Plan on the table of all governments of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helga. And if you've just joined us, we are welcoming you to today's conference of the International Schiller Institute, the Oasis Plan, the LaRouche Solution for Peace Through Development between Israel and Palestine and for all Southwest Asia. This is our panel 1, Creating the Conditions for Dialogue, Security, Peace, and Development in Southwest Asia. We are now honored by the presence of and would like to welcome our next speaker, His Excellency Professor Dr. Manuel Hassassian, Palestinian Ambassador to Denmark.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm privileged to be on this panel with distinguished guests. And this is an international podium where global messages should be addressed to the world, especially, with the Schiller Institute's plan, the Oasis Plan, that has great resonance in terms of economic development globally. But before, we talk a little bit about the Oasis Plan, I would like to highlight the apex of this protracted conflict that has been going on for the last 75 years between Palestinians and Israelis. We, the Palestinians, have been conquered many times in history. And the latest was basically the British mandate that on a golden platter through the Balfour Declaration handed it to Israel after the 1948 war, where Israel declared its independence. And in 1967, it continued its aggression by occupying the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And since then, this protracted conflict has been going on based on what we call ethnic cleansing, based on colonial settler movement, where the Zionists, with their project of creating a homeland at the expense of the expulsion of the Palestinian people, became a reality on the ground until 1967, where they have continued their Zionist project of occupying all historic Palestine. And since then, many UN resolutions, League of Nations, and what have you, international resolutions, the international legitimacy have been countless, been defied by this occupation and by this colonial settler movement that has been, supported by the United States of America unequivocally, let alone by European countries. We, the Palestinians, have paid the price of what is called the Holocaust, what is called the Jewish expulsion from Europe. We had paid the price by being extracted from our countries, being uprooted, and living under occupation for the last several decades now. Now, I don't want to go into the history of this conflict as much as to highlight what is going on today around us. Today, there is a war that has been declared by Israel on the entire Palestinian people, with the intention of decimating them, with the intention of forcefully diasporizing them again, with the intention of controlling the geography of Palestine and getting rid of the demography of Palestine. What we are witnessing today, a war of ethnic cleansing, a genocide, a murder, butchery. We cannot even find more words or more concepts to describe what is going on today in Gaza. Israel has the license to kill, unfortunately, by the support and by the complicit the United States of America, because the weapons that Israel has been using since the last 6 decades have been American, let alone British and European. But today we consider the Americans complicit in this war crime against humanity and against the Palestinian innocent people, where thousands and thousands of kids, children have been slaughtered and massacred in cold blood. What can we say about a government that brags about its democracy and supported by the democratic free world, supposedly, as being the bastion of democracy in the Middle East? What the last 6 decades have basically proved to us is that Israel is not a democracy. Israel is a theocracy. Israel is a settler colonialist. Israel grabbed the land of the Palestinians. Israel is building more settlements. Israel is creating new facts on the ground. Israel wants to get rid of the Palestinian people. The excuse of October 7 has showed explicitly the intentions of Israel. It's not only pursuing Hamas, but destroying the infrastructure of Gaza, destroying the Palestinian people in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, and let alone the West Bank. The mounting pressures and conflicts and killings in the West Bank is becoming now more evident than ever. Every day we have people being killed, so much incarceration of Palestinians, all the time, hot pursuit, in the West Bank. Settlers have taken arms against the Palestinians, innocent Palestinians. The army is supporting the settlers in their attacks and murders against the Palestinians. The gun-ho mentality of the West is being performed diligently by the settlers today in the occupied territories of the West Bank. And I cannot keep on describing the atrocious crimes Israel, with its heinous intentions of trying to exterminate the Palestinian people. This is a country that at one time made us believe that there would be a possibility of a two-state solution. When we decided to make our historic compromise in 1988 in recognizing the state of Israel and accepting the two-state solution, we thought the paramount of the two-state solution comes with the Oslo Accords, which, to our, of course, disappointment, the Oslo Accords have legitimized occupation, quadrupled the settlements in the occupied territories, and created conducive measurements for intensifying the conflict and the purging of the Israelis to the Palestinians. Now, we look at the situation today, the international community, beyond moral sympathy and empathy, beyond condemnation, whether directly or indirectly, have done nothing to stop this carnage and to stop this onslaught by Israel war machine against our people in Gaza and the West Bank. What we are witnessing is the fact that these Western governments have shown their double standards, have shown their hypocrisy, have shown their concepts of human rights being hollow by not putting any kind of pressure on Israel to stop these massacres, to stop this genocide. And we have seen that the Americans, talking on one side, humanitarian assistance and opening borders, yet at the same time sending military tons and tons of bombs to Israel to fight the Palestinians, allegedly Hamas threatening their security while killing innocent Palestinian people. So the Americans are responsible as much as the Israelis in this war of atrocious, measureless, I would say, magnanimity against, the innocent people. And yet at the same time, we see the world watching the daily atrocious crimes committed by Israel without doing anything. All these international courts, resolutions, the UN resolutions condemning Israel, asking Israel for withdrawal, stopping the carnage and what have you, has been only mere sheer talks and nothing, concrete on the ground. Every day we wake up and see more destruction, more killing of the Palestinian people. Where are we going from here? So far, we have seen that Israel has failed, and I say has failed dismally in fulfilling its objectives. It cannot get rid of Hamas. It cannot get rid of 2 million Palestinians who are now starving to death in Gaza. It cannot get rid of the Palestinian quest for independence and quest for self-determination, because the reality has shown that Palestinians will never kneel down and will never accept diasporization as they did in 1948. So Israel is in a dilemma. They cannot get rid of the Palestinians, and they cannot really bring security to the state of Israel, and cannot live legitimately, happily ever after in the Middle East without solving the Palestinian issue, and without solving the fulcrum of crisis in the Middle East, i.e. the Palestinian issue. There will never be security and stability in the Middle East. Saying this, because time is very limited and I don't want to continue describing, but I would like to forecast what could be done to get basically two countries neighboring each other to live in peace. I would say that the Palestinian people, even under occupation, have practiced the highest form of democracy. We had democratic elections, legislative, presidential, municipal, and what have you. We have built our civil society. We have created linkages between our society, civil society, and that of our government. And we have built basically the freedom of speech and expression. And we tried to also build our economic system, yet being under, totally submissive basically to that of the Israeli economy. But still, we managed to look at the options and resources of how we can create a sustainable economic production. Of course, the lack of water aquifers, the shortages of water in the West Bank, because the settlers use most of it, and their control of the water aquifers basically restricts the production of our agriculture products. And that in itself creates, a certain kind of an impediment towards progress and development as far as economy is concerned. But we cannot really economically develop when we are totally subservient to that of the Israeli occupation and to their economy and their control over our natural resources, yet alone also our human resources. And that's why, when we talk about peace, there will never be peace before a political resolution to this conflict. There is no economic solution without a political solution to this protracted conflict that has been fought between two epistemic communities for the last 8 decades now. And that's why this makes me more inclined to talk about, prospects of peace. Good. When peace first starts as a charity at home. First, we need to have our united people together. We need to end this conflict between Hamas and Fatah. And we need to have, one government that rules all over Palestine. That is the Palestinian Authority. That's number one. Number two, Israel has to stop this war.
Professor, could you please summarize? We're way over time. Thank you.
Yes. Number two, we would like to see the cessation of this war in Gaza. We would like to see the release of hostages in return. We would like to go back to the negotiating table on the concept of a two-state solution. And in order to do so, basically, we need to create the conducive conditions to implement, what I have been saying. And to do so, I would just touch on the Oasis Plan that has, elaborately explained to us how, through this plan, we can achieve peace and prosperity in the region. Yes, I agree. Political resolution comes first. Second, for the sustainability of peace, there comes the Oasis Plan to salvage, basically, and to sustain economic development between warring factions and to bring peace and prosperity for nations that have been in conflict. And the proposed plan of the Oasis has been taken seriously, I think, and it has potential, to be successful, within the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And that's why, I accepted to be on this conference, just also not to talk about the conflict, but to talk about prospects of peace in this conflict. And I think the Oasis Plan is a window of opportunity for Palestinians and Israelis to grab in order to create that kind of peace that would have longevity in prosperity and in living in coexisting for years to come. This much as I can say today, because the time restrictions is not allowing me to go into deeper analysis of this conflict and to talk about the complexities that could be considered as hurdles to the achieving peace and prosperity in the region.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we want to, if you've just joined us, welcome you to today's panel. You've just heard from His Excellency Professor Dr. Manuel Hassassian, Palestinian Ambassador to Denmark. We're welcoming now, as our next speaker, His Excellency Mounir Anastas, Palestinian Ambassador to UNESCO, that's the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I thought that I can speak in French as well. Maybe I start in French, if it is possible, and then I'll continue in English. OK? Bien. Je souhaite d'abord commencer par remercier l'Institut Schiller pour organiser cette réunion autour du plan Oasis.
Excuse me, pardon me.
Sorry.
You have to choose the French channel on Zoom.
In order, okay.
So that we can hear, we get the translation. So on your Zoom, there's a channel that you have to select.
The interpretation?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the interpretation.
Okay. So he's now ready. We're ready to go.
Okay. Well, and then
Sure. I start now. I will skip to English afterwards. I first want to thank the Schiller Institute for organizing this event, and I want to thank especially Madame LaRouche for her very, very rich speech, very profound, and certain things which she contributed, which I completely share and approve. I also want to thank Mr. Ambassador in Denmark. This avoids me of repeating certain things. Concerning the Oasis Plan, I'm not an expert on these technical issues, but what my interest in this plan is the principle and the spirit and the intention behind this, which is to have true economic and social development. We can achieve a prosperity and peace, not only in the Middle East, but in the entire region of Southwest Asia. To come back on the principles of the plan itself, I will come back afterwards. This project is directly connected to the issue of water. I want to talk about the UNESCO program on water. UNESCO has been trying to do several things, which it's not only education, science, and culture, which are part of UNESCO's prerogatives, but also the water issue. I want to say 2 words on that. Maybe now I will switch to English to make it more simple to everybody.
Before continuing talking about water and UNESCO, I would like to just express one thing, because it is always between the lines. And as Professor Hassassian mentioned, the Israeli regime is a theocratic regime, and they try to convince everybody that the conflict between Israel and Palestine is a religious conflict, which is completely false. Our conflict is not a religious conflict. It is a political conflict. It is a legal conflict, not religious at all. It is just between brackets. With this, now I will turn to the question of water in UNESCO. At UNESCO, we have a program called Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, IHP. It was founded in 1975, following the decade of hydrology, 1965 to 1974. So the Intergovernmental Cooperation Program, it is the only one international and intergovernmental cooperation program in the UN system. It is at UNESCO. Beside this, it has an intergovernmental council that meets every year, and the purpose, it is the cooperation between member states within the question of water, aquifers, and everything, of course. And there is what we call the World Water Forum. The next one, it is the 10th World Water Forum. It will take place in Bali, in Indonesia, next May, end of May. I don't have the exact dates in mind. Well, so this means that UNESCO is in charge also of the cooperation around water, which is the main principle in the Oasis Plan. The question of water now, if we relate it to the ongoing genocidal war of Israel on Gaza, everybody can recognize clearly that Israel is using water as a weapon. This is what we call weaponization of water. And this should be denounced and condemned by the international community. And unfortunately, the international community is watching passively in this regard, which makes it complicit. It has been mentioned that many countries are complicit in this conflict because they are providing weapons, just like the US. This is active complicity, but there is the passive complicity, those who do not condemn and who do not apply any pressure on Israel, the occupying power, to stop weaponization of water in the ongoing conflict. Well, the most important thing to keep in mind now is that UNESCO, as an specialized organization, is in charge of different fields, and all fields of competence of UNESCO have been targeted or destroyed even by the Israeli aggression, by the ongoing Israeli aggression. Well, I mentioned that UNESCO is also in charge of the safety of journalists as well as the freedom of expression. And you know that the number of journalists killed in Gaza, which reaches something like 133 journalists killed in Gaza. And this number is about 10% of the total number of journalists in Gaza, which is unprecedented in any conflict worldwide, even during the First and Second World War. No percentage as such, nowhere. If you take the current conflict, Russia-Ukraine, the number of journalists killed doesn't exceed 30 journalists, knowing that there are thousands, which means the percentage doesn't reach even 1%. So this means that Israel is targeting journalists, and we have information that they are targeting journalists with the use of the artificial intelligence. They are not only targeting journalists, but they are targeting also media centers. And why, especially journalists and media centers? Because they don't want international witnesses. They don't want to show the world what they are committing as crimes against humanity. Exactly, these are crimes against humanity. So I'll give you other examples with the ongoing conflict. For example, you know, whenever a European country changes its position or its language regarding the ongoing conflict, remember what Madame Zepp-LaRouche mentioned, that the word at the beginning had so much sympathy with Israel after the 7th of October, and day by day and week after week, they started changing their position while watching the Israeli atrocities in Gaza. So the Israeli army is targeting any witness, and that's why the international kitchen was targeted. Now, for the cultural centers, also, they targeted the French Cultural Center. Probably we can explain it because it was hit one day after a declaration done by the President Macron, who was telling Israel somehow that they are exaggerating. The next day, the French Cultural Center was hit, destroyed, completely destroyed, and the offices of the AFP, Agence France Presse, were hit in the building. They did not destroy the building, only the offices of Agence France Presse. So journalists, media centers are targeted. Now, cultural centers are targeted. I'm not talking now for the moment, I'm talking about the structures that are in the fields of competence of UNESCO. So we'll come back now to the one of the main fields of UNESCO, which is education and schools. More than 204 schools have been completely destroyed or harshly destroyed. Universities, 6 universities completely destroyed, and all of them have been partially destroyed. Now, the World Heritage and National Heritage sites were also destroyed. We talk about something like more than 250. Some sources mentions 300. Whatever it is, it's absolutely incredible and unprecedented. This shows the Israeli intention to eradicate not only the Palestinian people, but the Palestinian history and the Palestinian memory through these destructions. So when I talk about World Heritage sites, it includes also mosques and churches. One of the oldest church in the world, which is San Porphyrios, have been targeted, and it have been completely destroyed. The great Omari Mosque in Gaza as well, it has been completely destroyed, knowing that this mosque was a Byzantine church in the past, and before that it was a Roman temple, which means it is part of the heritage of humanity. It's not only for Palestinians. Many other sites, the El Basha Palace, which is also a historic place where Napoleon spent 3 nights, and Sibat, and so on and so on. The old port of Gaza, Antedon, it has been also destroyed. Well, the list is too long. I'm not going to mention all what has been destroyed, and the theaters and the cinemas and the museums and the musical studios, etc. In addition to all this, there are the people who are running these structures. We are not talking about them. We talk about 33,400 something people killed, but 17,000 were kids. It has been mentioned, and everybody mentions kids and women's, but nobody mentions students and teachers and university professors and university deans and musicians and artists. For example, there's Professor Taye, who is a UNESCO chair in Gaza. He was killed in his house together with his family. So all this shows the intention of Israel to eradicate the memory and the history of the population, not only the population. This is the most important thing to keep in mind. Now, unfortunately, if we try to examine what could be done, now this is the huge challenge after this huge destruction of all what I mentioned: schools, universities, World Heritage sites, and cultural centers, and so on. Now, the reconstruction, and here we can come back to the Oasis Plan, not to the plan itself, not to the project itself, but to the principles behind this project, which is the economic development that may lead to peace and prosperity. But Professor Hassassian mentioned something, that there are some prerequisites to apply this. And the prerequisite, it is political before all, which is everybody insists on the two-state solution. But meanwhile, those who mention it regularly, just like European countries, Germany and France, yeah, they are in favor of the two-state solution. But meanwhile, they do not recognize the 2 states. They recognize only 1 state over 2. So maybe we should start by this recognition of the 2 states, and then everything would be possible. I think this is the prerequisite number 1. Number 2, and it is related to number 1, which is equal rights for everybody, equal rights. This is also a prerequisite. And number three, that nobody is above the international law. But unfortunately, so far, Israel is above all laws and international law. So maybe the first step in order to be able to implement such a plan, such a huge plan like the Oasis Plan, maybe the European countries and the international community should start first by recognizing the Palestinian state, second, applying a serious pressure on Israel to stop its regular aggressions that has been mentioned by Professor Hassassian, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. I think that with this, I can stop. And I think that it resumes the whole problem. The next step, there are no next steps without the recognition of the state of Palestine. This is a prerequisite at this stage. Otherwise, we will return to the status quo that has been applied since the Oslo Accords, which means almost 30 years now. And that's why I think we should change completely the paradigm, and we should start by the recognition of the state of Palestine, and then everything will be possible, and the implementation of the Oasis Plan will be possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anastas. And if you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to our conference today, the Oasis Plan, the LaRouche Solution for Peace Through Development between Israel and Palestine and for all Southwest Asia. We've just heard from His Excellency Mounir Anastas, the Palestinian ambassador to UNESCO. We now will be hearing from Her Excellency Beryl Rose Sisulu, South African ambassador to Mexico.
Esteemed delegates, distinguished guests, as we gather here today at the international conference organized by the Schiller Institute, I am honored to address you on behalf of the Republic of South Africa. This occasion, which coincides with significant milestones in our nation's history, prompts us to reflect on the journey we have traversed, the challenges we have overcome, and the path we envision for the future. 30 years ago, on the 27th of April, 1994, South Africa celebrated a momentous occasion, the first democratic elections. This pivotal moment marked the culmination of a long and arduous struggle against apartheid, a struggle fueled by the unwavering commitment of our people to justice, equality, and freedom. As we commemorate 3 decades of democracy, it is imperative that we impart the lessons of our past to the younger generation, inspiring them to safeguard our hard-won liberties and to remain vigilant against any threat to our democratic values. The theme of this conference, Development as the Necessary Framework for Peace, resonates deeply with the journey of South Africa. Our experience underscores the intrinsic link between development and peace, recognizing that sustainable peace can only flourish in societies where development is nurtured and inclusive growth is fostered. Moreover, as we reflect on the words of Nelson Mandela, we are reminded of the fundamental aspirations shared by all humanity, the desire for safety, livelihood, health, and education. It is incumbent upon us as the global citizens to work tirelessly towards realizing these aspirations for all. In celebrating the 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Mexico and South Africa, we acknowledge the shared values and mutual commitments that underpin our partnership. From promoting democratic principles to advancing sustainable development goals, our collaboration epitomizes the spirit of solidarity and cooperation that is essential for addressing the pressing challenges of our time. The robust trade relations between our nations underscore the immense potential for further collaboration and economic synergy, paving the way for shared prosperity and mutual benefit. As we navigate the complexities of the contemporary world, marked by conflicts and crises, we are reminded of the imperative to unite in pursuit of peace. From Gaza to Ukraine and beyond, the quest for peace knows no borders and requires collective action rooted in dialogue, empathy, and understanding. It is incumbent upon us to champion the cause of peace, to advocate for diplomacy over discord, and to build bridges of cooperation that transcend ideological divides. Let us reaffirm our commitment to the noble ideals of peace, development, and global harmony. Let us draw inspiration from the resilience of our forebears and the aspirations of future generations. Together, let us forge a better world, one where justice reigns, prosperity abounds, and peace prevails. Now, continuing from our discussion on the imperative nexus between development and peace, I wish to delve deeper into the significance of peace within the context of South Africa, a nation that has traversed a tumultuous path towards democracy and inclusivity. Nelson Mandela's words resonate profoundly with our understanding of peace and development. He articulated that true development hinges upon education, a sentiment echoed by leaders worldwide. Education not only empowers individuals, but also cultivates the critical thinking, empathy, and social cohesion essential for nurturing peaceful societies. Furthermore, Mandela's assertion that real leaders must be willing to sacrifice for the freedom of their people underscores the profound commitment required to forge a path towards peace and development. In the South African context, peace holds paramount importance for several compelling reasons, each intricately intertwined with our nation's historical legacy and contemporary aspirations. Firstly, our tumultuous past, marred by apartheid and violent struggle for freedom, underscores the centrality of peace in our journey towards democracy and development. The peaceful negotiations led by Mandela and other visionary leaders exemplify the transformative power of dialogue and reconciliation in overcoming entrenched divisions and fostering national unity. Secondly, peace serves as a bedrock of social cohesion and unity in our culturally diverse nation. By embracing our differences and celebrating our shared humanity, we forge a common identity rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Thirdly, peace is indispensable for driving economic prosperity. A peaceful environment attracts investment, stimulates economic growth, and creates opportunities for all citizens to thrive. By investing in education, infrastructure, and innovation, we lay the foundation for sustainable development and shared prosperity. Fourthly, peace plays a pivotal role in shaping our international relations and promoting regional, continental, and global stability. A peaceful South Africa serves as a beacon of hope and inspiration for the continent, fostering cooperation and dialogue among nations. Fifthly, peace facilitates healing and trauma recovery, allowing individuals and communities to confront the legacies of our past and embrace a future defined by reconciliation and forgiveness. Peace is essential for safeguarding our communities against violence and crime, ensuring that all citizens can live in safety and security. And let me make clear that peace in South Africa is not merely the absence of conflict. It is the cornerstone of our collective aspirations for progress, prosperity, and social justice. Esteemed delegates, South Africa has made significant strides in improving the well-being of its citizens since the transition to democracy in the mid-1990s. However, it is imperative to acknowledge the persistent challenges that hinder our progress. The percentage of the population living below the upper middle income country poverty line has shown concerning trends, rising from 56% in 2010 to an estimated 62.7% in 2023. These trends are exacerbated by structural challenges and weak growth, further exacerbated by the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Rising unemployment rates, especially among youth, pose a severe constraint on household welfare and economic prosperity. The official unemployment rate in the fourth quarter of 2023 was 32.1%. High inequality perpetuates a cycle of exclusion by limiting the potential for inclusive growth that benefits all citizens. This cycle is sustained by a legacy of exclusion and the nature of economic growth, which fails to prioritize the needs of the poor and fails to create enough job opportunities. Moreover, wealth inequality exacerbates the situation, and low intergenerational mobility means that inequalities persist across generations with minimal change over time. In the face of these challenges, South Africa remains steadfast in its commitment to peace and development, both domestically and across the African continent. Aligned with the visionary Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, our nation is guided by principles that prioritize inclusive growth, unity, good governance, peace, security, and the preservation of cultural heritage. By upholding these principles, we lay the foundation for a future defined by peace, prosperity, and collective well-being. Furthermore, South Africa recognizes the significance of initiatives like the Oasis Plan, which aims to address global warming by restoring and improving soil quality. This project, a continuation of the Emission Zero Global Initiative, envisions the creation of a permanent rainforest in the north of Africa, where some of the most arid regions in the world are located. Through participation in initiatives like the Oasis Plan, South Africa can contribute to regional climate stability and biodiversity, aligning with our commitment to sustainable development and environmental conservation. At the halfway mark towards the 2030 Global Development Agenda, our country is still confronted by challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, and the devastating effects of climate change. The SDGs provide a plan that resonates with other regional, national, continental, and intercontinental development agendas. Over the past 4 years, the world has experienced several crises, including the devastating COVID-19 pandemic, economic downturns, increasing climate change impacts, and political instability. South Africa has made positive strides towards improving livelihoods, increasing access to basic services, and reducing CO2 emissions. Despite challenges such as electricity shortages, South Africa remains committed to sustainable development and inclusive growth through collaborative efforts. Development as the necessary framework for peace resonates deeply with the journey of South Africa. Our experience underscores the intrinsic link between development and peace, recognizing that sustainable peace can only flourish in societies where development is nurtured and inclusive growth is fostered. In conclusion, amongst the trials of a post-pandemic era and the looming specter of environmental crises, South Africa stands steadfast in its commitment to fostering peace and driving development, not only for its own citizens, but for the entire Africa and global community. We pledge unwavering dedication to an integrated development agenda, collaborating with partners across society to propel forward the National Development Plan Agenda 2063 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In doing so, we strive to kindle hope and realize aspirations of all South Africans and individuals worldwide. I thank you.
Thank you. That was Her Excellency Beryl Rose Sisulu, South African Ambassador to Mexico. We are going to be having a question and answer period. We are running a little bit behind time, but some people have asked about that, and there will be time to ask questions. We now have as our next speaker, His Excellency Donald Ramotar, former President of Guyana. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Anna, for inviting me to participate with your distinguished panel on this very important topic. We are meeting at a time when our world has never been so close to a terrible disaster of nuclear conflict that can liquidate the whole world. At the same time, I think we are meeting here too when the contours of great possibilities have developed on the international horizons that can take our people out of poverty and into a period of development and peace. The dangers that exist in the world are obvious. The two main issues on our agenda today, it's the Israel attacks on the Palestinians in the Gaza and the West Bank, and possibly everywhere. And two, the second proxy war, that the second danger is the proxy war that is being waged against Russia, with Ukraine being used as that proxy. This is a particularly dangerous situation because since NATO has in its ranks 3 nuclear powers, and Russia itself is a powerful nuclear power as well. The danger is posed. This danger has had its origin since the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union in the beginning of the 1990s, when despite the assurances of the Western nations of not to move the NATO 1 inch from the present-day Germany, it has gone more than 1,000 miles and now on the borders with Russia itself. Unfortunately, instead of seeing this as an opportunity for peace, the US began to see this as a chance to consolidate itself as the only superpower and the #1 power in our world. I want to just recall for some of you who would have known in the middle 1990s, Paul Wolfowitz expressed the view that the US must not miss this opportunity and in order to ensure its domination over the world. And he said, our objective is to prevent the re-emergence of a new rival, either on the territory of the former Soviet Union or elsewhere. This is our dominant consideration underlying the new regional defense strategy, and requires that we endeavor to prevent any power from dominating a region whose resources would be sufficient to generate global power. So very, very clearly that since the middle 90s, that this idea of domination was there in the United States in particular, but in NATO allies as well. And that explains the attack against Yugoslavia, attack against Iraq, attack in Afghanistan, and the destruction of Libya, and all of that. Recall too that they have abandoned all questions of decency and human rights. In 1996, Marlena Bright, in an interview that she had, she said that the sanctions that they have put on Iraq that killed more than 500,000 children was worth it. So they have absolutely abandoned all pretense of human rights and any type of decency in order to consolidate their control of the world as whole. This is a super kind of colonial status that is being experienced, mainly dominated by the United States, but also in the hands of, in partnership with some NATO countries that are playing the role of junior partner. The provocation against Russia is also instructive to follow, in the sense that all the time they had well prepared the economic sanctions that had been used against Cuba for more than 60 years and causing terrible hardship for the people there and against many other countries. Just remember too that just before the Russian special military operation, that there was an issue that in which we could have had peace, and this war was totally unnecessary, but we had the indecency of the betrayal of Russia, the deception by Germany and France, who had guaranteed the Minsk Accord, but only said that they had done that only to give time for NATO's troops or NATO's Ukraine to build up itself as a NATO power. And recall too that it was Jens Stoltenberg who on the eve was threatening Russia, and he said that they were prepared for the invasion. He said, we NATO have over 100 jets on high alert, 120 ships, allied ships in the sea from high north of the Mediterranean, 87 airborne divisions in Europe, plus US sent more than 1,000 troops to the Baltic. All of this was done to, this unquote, all of this was done to persuade Zelensky that he should have no agreement with Russia and he should go to war to defeat the Russians. This kind of mentality too explains the US attitude towards China, because if you pursue every single policy, statement or line or action by the Chinese government, you will see that China has never threatened anyone, never threatened the United States or anything. But because particularly since the end of 2008, after the financial crisis and China emerged as such a powerful economic player in the international scene, China has now been identified as a danger to that plan of total domination. Where all of this too has led to another factor, that countries are beginning to take other actions to try to counter some of the measures. Those countries that have some strong regard for their sovereignty have been taking actions to prevent their domination. And this is where our discussions today on the Oasis Plan, which was a plan with a lot of foresight that came about at a time long before the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, but which was very had great thinking behind it, and some of the elements in those plans are today in some of the plans that are being put forward as an alternative to the unipolar world. And that has come about because the BRICS is offering some hope, although there is still a lot of uncertainties in the BRICS, among the BRICS countries. There seem to be some type of resilience in it, and they are creating possibilities to create a more multipolar world that will offer greater possibility for countries that want to carry out their plans within themselves. Recall in the 70s, late 50s and 60s, 70s, the non-aligned movement had grown. And that was the same type of aspiration that gave rise to the leader, those who founded that movement, who wanted to have an opportunity to exercise their independence without being dominated by any outside force. However, they went down too with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the BRICS since then is now offering us a possibility. And that possibility comes about by having the possibility of trading in their own currencies and the possibility of developing new currencies, coupled with the Belt and Road Initiative that I mentioned just now by China, which is aimed at developing the infrastructure of many countries, both developed and developing countries, particularly important for Africa that has such a great deficit in infrastructural development, and that can help to see progress. Because the idea, as was mentioned here just before by many of the speakers who came before me, that there is a direct link between economic and social progress and world peace and development, peace generally and development. But we cannot have these plans without peace. That is why I say that peace is probably the most important thing. But for a sustained peace, we have to have social and economic progress, which the BRICS countries have been offering us. The success of the new venture is greatly dependent on how we manage to preserve peace and try to hold back the hands of those who want to drive the world into war just in order for them to control the economy and the lives of people everywhere else. It is vital because it is obvious that the governments of the West lack leadership today. If you look at the leadership in the Western powers, it is practically pathetic to see some of the most developed countries in the world that has leadership that is clearly wanting, lack of vision, and not working towards peace, and not working in the interest of humanity as a whole. And that hope only comes from China and from the BRICS countries that are trying to create the alternatives. While the world is in great danger, we also see the possibility of lasting peace through socio and economic progress. This position is recognized by most thinkers on the issue. Those who are opposed to it, imperialism, represent a socio-economic system that, in my view, has outlived its usefulness. And it is important for us to recognize that, and to recognize that to fight against that, there is no shortcut but mobilizing masses of people, to have masses of people involved in every way to try to hold back the hands of these people who seems to have lost control of their own actions because of the logic of capital, of profits, because who they represent. who they represent in the West, the military-industrial complex, the environmental, the companies that destroy our environment, like oil companies, mining companies, and so forth. These are the people who actually control the levers of power. And the only way we can fight against that is to organize masses in the streets to help us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Ramotar. That's President Donald Ramotar, former president of Guyana. And we're just going to, for a moment, one of our speakers, earlier speakers, Dr. Manuel Hassassian, unavoidably has to leave, and Mrs. Zepp-LaRouche wanted to shortly address him before we continue with our presentation. So, Helga?
Well, I want to thank actually both of you, both ambassadors of Palestine, for sharing your deep felt experiences with us, which I think the world needs to know. I just would like to basically make the point that I think you mentioned the need to have a political solution first. And that is exactly what the Oasis Plan is trying to put on a different level, because all the debates in the United Nations and other fora which demanded the political solution first did not accomplish what was intended. And it is our view that we have to have an absolute ironclad commitment to an economic development plan as the precondition to move the political situation. Now, when the Oslo Accord was signed, Lyndon LaRouche, my husband, was emphatically saying that the only way how it could succeed would be to put shovels in the ground, to immediately start earth-moving machines, so that the people on the ground would see that there is an improvement of their immediate life situation. And that was not done, because at that point the World Bank denied the kind of credit which would have been necessary. And as we all know, the Oslo Accord did not succeed. So since the whole purpose of this conference is to put together, and especially when we hear the other speakers in the second panel, we want to put together a very concrete sort of bunch of economic flowers, development project flowers, to then take the result of this conference to go to all governments of the world and other institutions to basically, try to get the kind of support, because I personally think that the only way how we will be able to implement that is if we get an emergency conference, a comprehensive Mideast conference, as it was, for example, mentioned early on by China. To my knowledge, unfortunately, they did not concretize it very much since, but it is still the idea that you have to have a comprehensive Mideast conference. And I think the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia is the most suitable precedence, and then discuss, what would be the vision for all of the region. Because I think you have to break the cycle of violence and despair. And if there would be a vision how Southwest Asia could look like in 20, 50, even 100 years, being a fully developed modern area with green forests and agricultural fields where now there is desert, new cities, integrated infrastructure, and then have the vision that all the young people should become scientists, engineers, teachers, farmers, that they would see a reason why it would make sense to study, to have a family, to build their careers, to have a normal life. I think to inject that sense of hope in the young people is almost the precondition for this project to succeed. So I think the vision of economic improvement is an absolutely essential ingredient for getting peace and finding a political solution. And I would like to thank you very much for your participation. And I hope you would help us to continue this organizing for this project even beyond this conference.
Can I make a simple contribution before I leave?
Yes.
Just a reaction to Madame LaRouche's, of course, eloquent presentation and ideas. Thank you so much for your concern about our conflict, because, as you know, the fulcrum of instability in the Middle East lies in the solution of the Palestinian problem. I can understand par excellence the economic development, how it could be cataclysmic in its effect to a negotiated process between two countries that are legitimately, mutually respect each other and try to find a plausible solution for sustaining peace. And that longevity of peace is based on economic integration and development. That cannot be underestimated, but we cannot really come to talk about economic development with two negotiators, let's say, two countries. One is the top dog and the other one is the underdog. So we cannot have negotiations between occupier and occupied and talk about economic development. Economic development could be a catalyst to improve an ongoing negotiations that is based on mutual reciprocity and respect. When there is no dignified respect between two contending parties, then the results will be a dismal failure. And of course, I want to add one simple sentence that I always do. There will be never a military solution to our conflict. Israel has won so many wars, but could not bring peace and security, neither to Israel nor to the Middle East. So what I say, the only way out is negotiations, mutual respect, inclusivity, and not exclusivity, and the idea of accepting each other on an equal footing is the only way to progress towards peace and security. Thank you so much for inviting me again. I wanted to conclude with some positive remarks that war will never bring peace. Peace will bring stability and economic prosperity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much also. Thank you, Madam.
All right. We're going to resume. I would just, though the moderators are not supposed to intervene, just point out that an intensive and extensive discussion of this variety is only available because of what the International Schiller Institute is doing. If possible, we certainly would wish to sponsor a more in-depth discussion, which went on for quite a longer period of time. All right, and there are many, many people, particularly in the United States, which would deeply appreciate and benefit from that. The shocking situation that exists, and at the same time, the shocking capability, prospect for changing it. So thank you, gentlemen, very, very much for being with us. And if you can stay longer, please do. We're going to resume our speakers at the moment. And the next speaker is Dr. Connie Rahakundini Bakrie, lecturer and strategic analyst of Indonesia.
Hello, thank you very much. Okay, first I'd like to thank Madame LaRouche for the invitation and the inspiring opening speech. And my deep appreciation is actually to the Schiller Institute for inviting me here. And by then, allow me to really discuss about what the biggest topic that we are discussed tonight. So I think I like to talk about the nation in Southwest Asia common characteristic, because this is the first issue. I think in the Middle East, there share several common characteristics, including historical and cultural ties. Philip Carl Salman, professor of the anthropology at McGill University, stated that peace is not possible in the Middle East because of the value and goals other than peace is actually more important to the Middle Easterners. Loyalty to kin, clan, cult, and the honor of which is won by such loyalty. Relationship between different groups actually always oppositional in principle, because tribes hold seeing themselves in opposition to the other tribes. The strongest political norm among tribesmen was loyalty. One must always support closer kin against more distant kin, and loyalty was rewarded with honors. Not supporting your kin was dishonorable. And because of that, Mamun Fandi wrote once that we are the people of blood relations and family ties of Shalal. And he's mentioning about the Islamic history began as an intellectual revolution, but then is transformed into somewhat tribal state. So this means, that's what he said, that we now have a history of tribes instead of history of ideas. And because of that, come to think about the Sultan Sulaiman the Magnificent. Actually, from the Ottoman Empire, never tried to divide them with or by demarcation line. And it's Jerusalem enjoyed special status during this period of Islamic rule because of religious status, and it was ruled by Ottoman for 400 years. But the Empire Ottoman was officially abolished in 1923. And the British government issued the Balfour Declarations, as mentioned before. For the sake of the declaration, would rely Jewish opinion, especially in the United States, to the side of the Allied power against the Central Power during World War I. The other story is President Harry Truman have a big sympathize on Zionism and endorsed the 1947 UN partition plan for Palestine to create Arab state and Jewish state. And this happened despite the opposition from the administrations, and recognized the state of Israel on May 14, 1948. So fast forward stories after that, Turks, Arabs, Iranians have launched military campaigns to suppress Kurds. Christian, Yazidis, Baha'i, Jews, and continue to be ethnically cleansed. And Arabs and Persian and Sunni Shia is trying to gain power over the other competition that has been on the main underlying factors of the Southeast Asia war. So where to start? If I mentions about where to start, I think let's talk about United States, because I mentioned just now about Truman involvement. President Clinton has made over 175 telephone calls to head of state in direct support of the Middle East peace process, with 6 visits to the region. And the president also hosts a number of meetings and summits in the United States. For example, the Israel-Syria talk at Severs Dawn in 1919. The Way River meeting in 98 and 95 Washington Summit, 94 signing the Washington Declaration by Israel and Jordan. And this is very significant things because it's ended the war, and the signing Declaration of Principle 1993 for the historical handshake between Prime Minister Rabin and Chairman Arafat. In countries that lack monarchies or strong political institutions, ISIS rises to power and exploiting power in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, to carry out serious crimes against humanity. So even though President Trump's great achievement with the Abraham Accord and normalization work accompanied with larger vision for social economic reform, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco pursue the peace agreement as part of broader regional efforts to countering extremism, mobilization, and stabilizing the region after confronting two tough challenges from the Arab Spring. So I think we have to discuss now about the carrying the weight of the word on one or two shoulders. Peace must mean legitimate right for the Palestinian and the real security for the Israelis. This must begin with something even more basic. British stated this, then British has to take full responsibility. The Balfour Declaration is widely seen as a precursor to the 1948 Palestinian Nakba, when Zionist arms group trained by the British as well. France, at the other hand, is like mentioned by Madame Rose regarding Sykes and Picot, is actually was involved and announced its support prior to the issuing of the Balfour Declaration. May 1917, a letter from Jules Cambon, a French diplomat, to Nahum Sokolos, the Polish Zionist, expressed the sympathized view of the French government toward Jewish colonization in Palestine, and the letter was seen as a precursor to the Balfour Declarations. The Balfour document is very controversial because first, I think Edward Said mentioned that's made by European power about non-European territory, disregard of both the presence and wishes of the native majority resident in the territory. Second, the declaration was one of the 3 conflicting wartime promises made by the British. When it was released, Britain has already promised the Arabs independence from Ottoman Empire in 1915. British already promised the French in separate treaty known as 1960 Sykes-Picot, where the majority of Palestinians would under international administration and the rest of the region would be split between the two colonial powers after the war. So the declaration, however, meant that Palestinians would come under British occupations and that Palestinian Arabs who lived there would not ever gain independence. Third, the declaration introduced a notion that was reportedly unprecedented in international law. The word of national home, the use of the term of national home to the Jewish people opposed to the state, left the meaning that open to the misinterpretation, to any interpretation. So now we are talking about Indonesia position. Indonesia defense of Palestine from Israeli colonialism is, I think, the only one in the world, is implemented on the preamble to the 1945 Constitution that we have. In essence, it condemns all forms of colonialism, and it's committed to bringing peace and continuing the support of Sukarno of firm states. Therefore, Indonesia needs to be ready in this point. I think Indonesia needs to be ready politically, militarily, diplomatically, and the last one is financially, because Indonesia doesn't have the capability to project the military power that far to that area, not to mention that we are embarrassingly outgunned. So centrality of the Palestinian cause versus the action of individual countries. I think the leading Islamic power set out to achieve the semblance of united front of the vital issue of the Palestine, but it's only managed to reinforce prevailing division. The important point is to note that while the joint statement has argued to centrality of the Palestinian causes as the precondition to regional peace and stability, but the action and individual countries reveal the national and geostrategic interests, not the Palestinian cause. Finally, the character of the ultimately make all the difference. We have seen throughout human history that nations rise, develop, thrive, gain strength, overcome great challenges, is actually with the strength of their character, not necessarily with their material stockpile. So unfortunately, Al Jazeera once stated that most Muslim countries are ruled by corrupt, autocratic, despotic, or worse, maybe no good rulers. Hoping Indonesia will do something significant because we are one of the biggest Muslim countries in the world, I think we'll face a long and steep road domestically. So what Indonesia can do actually, in my opinion, is first encourage the UN to take the source of the problem, how to make England and France to sit down and seriously think about the solution, because whatever it is, they are both countries who started. So it doesn't concentrate on Islamic countries and the Southwest countries themselves, but on the two former colonialists and the biggest root causes of this war. So I think the biggest homework that we have is how to overcoming nervousness that the UN on the issue of the confidence building strategy to UN, to do something to the France and British. I think that is my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bakrie. That is Dr. Connie Rahakundini Bakrie, lecturer, strategic analyst from Indonesia. And our next spokesperson is Pavel Shidlovsky, charged with affairs of the nation of Belarus to the United States. Welcome, sir. Happy to have you here. I think he's muted. Just a moment.
I have it.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the leadership of the International Schiller Institute for convening this important and timely conference. I appreciate the professional, profound, nuanced, and sober presentations of the distinguished speakers on the issues which are on top of the agenda of world policymakers and which define the future world order. I fully agree with the statement of the conference organizers that it falls to us to ensure that every life in the world is sacred, that international law must prevail to prevent genocide, and that economic development must be the engine for peace. We in Belarus adhere to the same approach. I'm pleased and honored to have this opportunity to present the vision of Belarus on the topic of our today's panel, Dialogue, Security, Peace and Development, with special focus on Southwest Asia. We all understand that the emerging multipolar and a fairer world order is categorically unacceptable for the collective West, which is trying to maintain its political, financial, and economic dominance by any means and at any cost. Belarus has long been known as a net donor of peace, security, and stability in the region. The international community has viewed Belarus as a mainstay of regional security. We were the first ever to unilaterally forego the possession of nuclear weapons. We were among the first to implement the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. We suggested integration of integrations in the post-Soviet space and beyond. Well known are our initiatives like creating a nuclear weapon-free space in Central and Eastern Europe, recognizing diversity of states' path of development, establishing a Helsinki II dialogue, developing the digital neighborliness belt, and to name the few. Everyone knows about Minsk agreement that helped to avoid massive human casualties in eastern Ukraine between 2015 and 2022, and was the only operation started in Ukraine in 2022. Belarus initiated and hosted 3 rounds of talks on Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. The draft agreement was initialed by the parties. Russia then made significant concessions, but someone in the West did not want peace in Ukraine and wanted the war until the last Ukrainian. So after the 4th round in Istanbul, the talks stopped altogether. Belarus could play the role of a third party in the resolution of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, said the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko recently. Just this Thursday, my president pledged readiness to help in case of negotiations between Moscow and Kiev. Neither the Ukrainians nor the West need to aggravate relations with Belarus. Having a third party always comes in handy in a situation when 2 states, or 1 nation, in fact, have been pitted against each other. In this case, it looks like both Russia and Ukraine will need a peace-loving, calm, predictable Belarus. We maintain a strong state based on the unity and patriotism of the people, the commitment of the Belarusians to peaceful evolutionary development, and categorical rejection of destructive color revolutions. The last attempt by the West to stage a color revolution in Belarus in 2020 did not succeed, and we have since taken exhaustive measures to make sure that it will never be repeated. We fight information war waged against us with truth. We launched a nationwide comprehensive investigation into the crimes of genocide committed against the people of Belarus by the Nazi Germany and its collaborators. Raises its ugly head in Belarus again. We made a strategic choice. It will not be possible to tear our normal dialogue with interests of both sides. Belarus is ready to restore dialogue with the West and to jointly seek ways out of the current situation. We call on our Western partners to realistically assess the current state of affairs and deeply rethink everything. The ability to serve as a logistical link between Asia and Europe is the major foundational factor in the political economy of Belarusian statehood. Belarus plays an essential geostrategic role in the logistical transport networks between Asia and Europe through the Northern Corridor, which passes via Russia and Belarus. Instability in the Middle East and the Red Sea have increased the demand for overland transport. It's in working in regional organizations like the Non-Aligned Movement, of which we have long been a member, our cooperation with the countries of the Global South, including significantly, and historic process of Belarus's accession to the Shanghai Security Organization has entered its final stage. We have initiated accession to BRICS. The systemic work to intensify cooperation with ASEAN has continued, including through the promotion of Belarus's application to join the Bali Treaty. In our foreign policy, our main aspiration is fairness. In our actions, pragmatic economic considerations trump ideological positions. We have developed numerous connections with international counterparts in the global south and elsewhere. On Middle East, in October 2023, Belarus expressed its serious concern over the sharp aggravation of the situation there. We were profoundly shocked by an exorbitant number of casualties. We mourn with relatives and friends of the deceased and wish speedy recovery for those who sustained injuries. We believe that any manifestation of aggression is unacceptable. Civilian casualties are inadmissible. We call on the parties to the confrontation to take urgent measures to de-escalate tension in the region, to come to the negotiating table and find ways to resume dialogue, to make sure that the tragedy that happened would never happen again. The main goal is to achieve a historic compromise. We are convinced that the path of direct negotiations for a long-term settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli crisis alternative. Belarus believes that the establishment of lasting peace in the Middle East is an important basis for economic development and prosperity, a factor of growth of international trade and long-term stability of states of the entire region. We are confident that peace in the region is what the countries all over the world are interested in today. We proceed from the fact that the conflict can be resolved exclusively on an international legal basis through the implementation of the principle of two states for two people. Aimed to secure long and lasting settlement. Programs providing for sustainable development are of particular value, as they are, no doubt, win-win solutions. The Oasis Plan is ambitious, but it stems from the situation on the ground and provides benefits for all parties. The more you look at it, the more it grows on you. Holders and international community at large will heed the appeal and join the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Pavel Shidlovsky, Chargé d'Affaires of Belarus to the United States. Thank you very much for that statement. We're now going to hear from Professor Georgy Toloraya, the Director of the Russian National Committee for BRICS Research. Welcome.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Schiller Institute and Dr. Helga Zepp-LaRouche for inviting me to this very interesting meeting. Although I spent most of my diplomatic career in East Asia and been doing a United Nations job and BRICS in my latest years, still the question of Middle East and the question of the conflict there is well known and interesting to all the scholars of international relations. In fact, I remember when I was a schoolboy, more than 60 years ago, almost 60 years ago, one of the reports I was suggested to do at the geography lessons. We had good education in Soviet Union, so everybody prepared some kind of reports on the countries and territories. So I started this report with the words that Lebanon has a very favorable geographical and climatic location. And the teacher, who was very strict, and I mostly got excellent marks at the time, said, "No, I'll give you unsatisfactory mark." I said, "Why?" Because Lebanon is located next to Israel, and that's a place where there'll be always some conflict and war. But I said, "Dear teacher, well, political conflicts and wars, these are things which are temporary, while geographical location is permanent. And he said, no, this is permanent as well. 60 years later, I would say that this, broadly speaking, the Middle East region is still far from peace. And the conflicts raging there, and it can even lead to a global war. That's what we witness today. And although since that time already the world order have changed once, and now we are, because of the end of the Cold War, and now we witness the change for the second time, when the unipolar world is changing to multipolar, or I prefer the words polycentric world order. Still, this conflict is far from being solved. So, is there any possibility to find some new approaches, to find some new solutions, maybe in the new paradigm of a world order which is based on sovereignty and on the consideration of interests of all the countries and parties? This is what BRICS promotes. Mind you that now we have two countries of the region, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, involved in BRICS activities. So maybe this conflict should be paid to more attention by the BRICS, because I in general support the theory of the Schiller Institute that peace, that the development and prosperity are the basis for long-standing peace, although you cannot reach those without the peace. So what comes first? But anyway, without future development, sustainable development, I don't think that any kind of peace deal would be long-term and permanent. So how BRICS could help? BRICS, as you know, has the mission of introducing a new global governance, which would represent the interests of the evolving countries of global South, and to do away with the dollar-based financial system by introduction of a physical economy and new financial system, as well as new security paradigm. How can it be translated to the situation in the Middle East? You know, being a scholar, I think that I cannot really make a research which would answer all these questions. But I've heard that some institutions and big companies, even I think the World Bank, they have special analytical units which are missioned with production and exploring how absolutely unrealistic ideas can be realized, how they can be implemented, what can happen if some kind of crazy idea could take root. And I also remember one of the novels by a Russian writer whose name was Aksonov, which was called The Island of Crimea. You know that Crimea is the peninsula, but this author imagined what if Crimea was an island like Taiwan and would develop separately from USSR. That was long ago, but I'm trying to use the same approach. And what if I would suggest a novel which would be one of the possibilities of the future? And this future can be a BRICS mandate on Palestine. We had British mandate, but I am now talking about something like a Gaza Strip as a new Hong Kong. By the way, Hong Kong is 3 times bigger in square kilometers than Gaza Strip. Is it possible to create some kind of a BRICS rented territory in Gaza Strip, which would be rented or for 100 years or whatever, or given in governance for some period of time to BRICS countries, with, for example, Saudi Arabia and Egypt being the operators of this project. Then we can find an answer how the Oasis Plan could be financed, because BRICS New Development Bank may take a lead in infrastructure development, and the Gaza Strip would be governed internal affairs by the locally elected government. Well, say Hamas, because Hamas was elected, and but the issues of foreign policy and security would be on the responsibility of the BRICS. So that would put an end to the Gaza Palestinian direct contact. There will be no direct contact, in fact, because in this case, most of the finance, technology, and foreign trade would come through the sea, and maybe by land through Egypt. And in this case, this territory may develop in a very fast manner. Well, after all, look nearby. Tel Aviv 100 years ago was just a desert. Now we see a bustling city. So, well, why not the same in Gaza, for example? But the issue of financing and the resources for development are as important as the concept of development itself. And being serious, I like the Oasis Plan, but the first question which comes to me, how it can be financed and how it can be implemented, even if the peace accord somehow is being agreed, and if there are two-state solution, one of them being a Palestine with the Gaza Strip as a part of it. How will it be developed? Who will finance it? Who will help the people there build peaceful and prosperous life? Sorry for speaking in a paradoxical way, but I think I've given the honorable attendees of this meeting some food for thought about BRICS' role in general and about some kind of paradoxical solution for the conflict, for the issue which hasn't been solved for so many years, decades, and even centuries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Toloraya. That was Professor Georgy Toloraya, Director of the Russian National Committee for BRICS Research, and a very provocative presentation. I think we're now able to go to our discussion period, and that's very important. So we're going to bring up on the screen those who are still here and able to get on, and we're trying to get a couple of other people as well. I'm seeing Mr. Shidlovsky. I'm seeing Professor Toloraya. I'm seeing Dr. Bakrie. President Ramotar is with us, yes. And Helga is there too. And is that Dr. Sisulu? Okay, very good. Yep, she's there as well. All right. So, Helga, let me first go to you and just ask what you have to say about sort of the array of things that have been presented here.
Well, I'm very happy about it because, as we hear, the different representatives of countries have all constructive ideas which don't look as cohesive at this point, but that's the whole point of dialogue. I think what Dr. Bakrie said in terms of putting the responsibility to the French and the British is a very interesting idea because they caused the problem. And I think it would be just fair to remind them that they have a responsibility to help to solve it. I think that also the role of South Africa naturally is extremely important, because it is my deepest conviction that by the South African government taking the case to the International Court of Justice in Den Haag, your country saved actually the honor of the human species by doing that. And I want to thank you full-heartedly for that. And, you know, naturally, what President Ramotar and His Excellency Dr. Shidlovsky said is extremely useful, because it shows you, you know, that there is actually a potential for growth of a majority of countries coming together from quite different parts of the world. And I think also what Professor Toloraya said naturally is mind-boggling. I think that's a very constructive idea, because, you know, there needs to be, first of all, a two-state solution. There needs to be a security guarantee. And obviously the BRICS countries together have the combined economic and security power to provide such an approach. And I think the financing, in one sense, you know, I don't think that should really get people, you know, freaked out about it as an unsurmountable problem. Because first of all, I really think that all the countries of the region have a fundamental interest that this continuous series of wars stopped. Because, you know, even if some countries in the region are very wealthy, you know, because they had control over their own resources, and they have right now very rich sovereign wealth funds, and they have turned their country into prosperity zones. Nevertheless, you know, I mean, if the whole region and the entire Islamic world is so upset about what is happening in Gaza, that pertains also to the security of their own countries. So I think that there is a common interest to, you know, put together some fund to get some kickstarting of some of these projects. I know that there are some large nuclear firms who would be ready to put in the, you know, to start digging, not nuclear firms, but engineering firms digging canals, nuclear firms starting to build nuclear reactors. And actually the starting sum to get this going is relatively small as compared to the money which has been going into the military destruction, which I, you know, quoted just for the United States alone was $8 trillion in 20 years. And, you know, if you only take a percentile of maybe 3% of that, that would already be enough to get this project going. So I think we really have to rethink, you know, how to retool this war machine into production and you know, actually reconstruction of this whole area. So I would think that if other of the honorable speakers here would comment on these proposals, I would be very happy.
All right, so I think the best way to do that is probably for people to just indicate by raising your hand, so I know whom I should call upon. And also let me just indicate that we have, of course, Russia and Belarus, and we have South Africa and Guyana and Indonesia, and we have Germany represented. We do have an offering, which we'd like to at some point include, from Graham Fuller of the United States, former station chief in Kabul for the CIA. He's been on our program a few times. He works with the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We don't want to put that in now because we need to let you all have a chance to say whatever you'd like to say. So anybody have anything that they would like to add or respond to that you heard on the panels? Yes, Ms. Sisulu.
Thank you, Program Director. Thank you, Dr. Helga. Thank you for the opportunity of allowing me to participate. I just want to say that as a South African, I think I'm very proud that we have started, the bell is ticking, and it's ticking for all peace-loving nations to stand up. And I think the message has been sent loud and clear by South Africa. And I'm happy that I see what is happening, because this was the whole intention, was to say all peace-loving countries, all peace-loving people, we need to stand up. We need to enforce international law through the international bodies. International bodies should not pick and choose when to enforce international law. Otherwise, where are we going to as a world? What society do we want to leave for our children? What is the legacy that we want to leave behind? We are busy with war when we have so many important issues that we should be addressing. We should be worried about climate change for the future generations. We should be worried about poverty in the world. But we are busy with war. We are at war with each other, which is not going to benefit anybody. So I think let us all, as peace-loving individuals, as peace-loving countries, put our heads together and see how best do we intervene, how best do we advocate for the two-state solution, how best do we enforce respect for each other internationally. And some countries and people should not be special and be allowed to violate other people's human rights and dignity. It is unacceptable. We should all be on an equal footing. And I think for Palestinians and Israelis, they should be allowed, we should be encouraging them to discuss, to negotiate peace, not to fight each other. We in South Africa have attained peace through negotiation. I think for now I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me also indicate that people know we have questions from France, from Germany, from London, and we have some questions from various places in South America. So we do have plenty of things to discuss. If any of you don't have anything to say at the moment, and I can go to some of those questions, I think maybe that's what I'll do. Here is one. This is from Victor Lopez, and he asks, given that Israel has shown its indifference to concepts of international law and is guilty of genocide, human rights violations, and so forth, and considering that the world's policeman, the United States, isn't going to stop its partner, the only real perspective for stopping the conflict seems to be to subject Israel to all possible sanctions, starting with trade sanctions. But since it's unlikely that that would happen, my question is, who or what will stop this? By the time the global South's economy has developed, Palestine will have disappeared. That's the statement. Anybody want to respond to that? If not, you can take these things in, because some of these are simply statements, some of them are questions. Okay, so let's simply note that has been registered, and we'll continue. Here's a question from Germany. This is from Manfred. He states, the successful implementation of the Oasis Plan is the key to transforming the monopolitically determined old world order into a world economic order of the future. But we also see, and many contributions today show how difficult it will be to achieve these goals. Above all, the military complexes of the United States, England, and France will do everything they can to prevent the development of the BRICS plus countries. They will try to sow new discord between the people on the basis of old border disputes and conflicts between ethnic groups. I also see the possibility of settling the old conflicts through joint regulations on the basis of the further development of a Peace of Westphalia, new Peace of Westphalia, and of utilizing areas of border disputes together economically, bringing divided ethnic groups together again. So that's the comment from Manfred. Yes, is that Mr. Shidlovsky?
Yeah, I will. I agree with this comment and with the previous comments of the esteemed ambassador of South Africa. I think that now the global order is changing, and more importance is given to regional organizations, international organizations that are appearing and are gaining strength, like BRICS, like Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So there are many issues that should be discussed within those organizations, which represent the majority of the people of the world and almost like 50% of the world economic output. So it is the time to reconsider ways to to resolve the issues in the world. And of course, I don't want to diminish the role of the United Nations, specifically the role of the UN Security Council, which is the main body. But unfortunately, there are countries which, on the one hand, approach the role of the United Nations selectively. In one case, trying to implement and be very active. In other cases, trying not to participate in decisions and not to consider themselves being bound by the decisions of these organizations, even the United Nations Security Council. And the problem with the current situation is that, unfortunately, the decisions of UN Security Council, which were taken recently and which were taken long ago, were not implemented, and that's one of the reasons of situation being aggravated. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Toloraya, I thought I saw your hand up as well.
Yes, I wanted to comment on the question from Mexico about sanctions on Israel. Well, my experience, I've been working in this area for some time, shows that the sanctions, even UN sanctions, they do not solve any major problems. They cannot fundamentally change the policy of the countries, of any actors in crucial and vital questions. So that won't help. So balance of interest is important. And I would like to support my Belarusian colleague on emphasizing the role of new structures like BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization in addressing the issues of global security that otherwise have proved to be not possible to be solved. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, yes, President Ramotar.
I have a different kind of worry. I'm seeing every day that international law is being undermined and even practically being destroyed. We all know of the fact that that the decision of the Security Council are supposed to be binding, but we saw recently when you had a vote at the Security Council to have a ceasefire in the Gaza area, it was totally ignored, and the United States taking the position that it was optional, that it was not binding on the United States and probably not binding on anyone for that matter. We see also now that embassies are not sacrosanct as they used to be. They are now being attacked. We saw Iranian embassy was recently attacked in Syria, and that is beginning to look like spreading, because what happened in Ecuador with the Mexican embassy, it shows that people are taking examples from the bad examples that are happening. So I think that they probably need to be in the very near future a total discussion on all of our international institutions and our international laws and there should be so that we can have probably a common position on these things and not to allow it to have different interpretation. We're seeing the violation. Look at one that is so glaring, that in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Russians moved children out of harm's way, get them out of harm's way from them not to be killed and not to be injured and hurt, to protect them. But President Putin has been summoned or charged with the International Criminal Court. And Israel, that has killed thousands of innocent babies, murdered them, we're not hearing that any attempt to charge them, or the International Criminal Court, some of the positions that they are taking. To my mind, although I agree with the South African foreign minister when she said she was happy with some of the decisions because it meant, so to my mind, there seems to be subjected to some type of pressure that they did not demand a ceasefire in what was very, very clear to everyone of a genocide taking place in the Gaza. Therefore, just to conclude here, I think that there is really a desperate need to put back on the agenda to have a general understanding, a ironclad kind of agreement. Otherwise, so that we can respect international institutions and international laws, have them properly represented. For instance, it's a shame that Africa is not on the Security Council, a whole continent not on the Security Council. And I think that is a discussion that needs to be had internationally as early as possible. Otherwise, the authority of the United Nations will continue to decline in a world that is very dangerous with the spread of nuclear weapons that can probably go even more and more. That's my worry at this point in time.
Yeah. We have a question. Okay, well, Dr. Bakrie, go ahead, and then we'll have another question. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think what Madame LaRouche wanted to happen is our dreams. But again, I believe that everything has to be started politically. We cannot go anywhere without that. And I've come to think that all the Muslim country is not one voice for solving this problem. I think we can propose BRICS power to do something about it, especially when you are mentioned about President Putin leadership. I think President Putin leadership is not only for Russia, but today is actually for the world. What happened in Africa, for example, is by his leading power, it seems like he solved a lot of problems. I really hope Indonesia, as the founder of non-alignment movement, can do something, but we have limited on our capability on the politically, militarily, and economically. So I think perhaps what we can do, we can propose a BRICS country to strengthen their unity and really mentioning about things that can be done for this issue. And the other thing that we have to discuss is about Hamas. I think it's very interesting that that 89% of the Jews believe that it's actually going to war against Hamas is valid. Meanwhile, half of the Muslims, which is 49%, believe that Hamas' reason to fight Israel are valid. I think the Hamas issue is the other issue that we have to discuss further, despite only about Palestine and Israel. Thank you.
Okay. There's a question from France that I'm going to direct both to Helga and I think also to Ambassador Sisulu. Here's what the question says. I don't have the person that asked it, but I'll read it. It says, at the end of the last century, Israeli academics created the wave of new historians. They gave the public access to the historical truth that had been silenced after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. At the start of the Oslo period, it would be the 1993 plus period, their work offered credible hope of reconciliation. However, with the failure of the peace negotiations, the acceleration of colonization, attacks, assassinations, and growing insecurity, this hope was eliminated. The story of the Nakba, of the ethnic cleansing suffered by the Palestinians, and of the massacres perpetrated by the terrorist groups of the Haganah and others, which was obviously already well known to the Palestinians, was revealed to the Israelis and to the world by these Israeli researchers at the end of the last century but it is once again the subject of censorship in Israel since the expulsion of these researchers from their own universities, such as Ilan Pappé, who taught in Haifa. As a result, a very large proportion of Israeli citizens are still misinformed about their national history. To reestablish a dialogue and hope to repair historical wounds, what do you think of the idea of rehabilitating these historians and their work in Israeli universities and building bridges with them elsewhere in the world? So that's the question.
Maybe Her Excellency will go first.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. I think in many instances, history does get distorted. And I do think that for historians, it's important for that history to be corrected. I think it is very important for people to know their history and to move on from that history, be it a bad history or a good history. We need to take lessons from that history, but we cannot wish history away. What has happened would have happened at the time, but we need to look and learn lessons and move forward. But we cannot want to hide it. Even future generations need to know. I will give the example of South Africa, is that we went to 300-400 years of apartheid, of difficulties, and our children later were given a false history. And I think it is incumbent upon us to make sure that the correct history continues to live. We continue to learn from our mistakes. We continue to move on, but we cannot wish history away. And the history of Palestine and Israel, we all know, is a very sad history. And we need to find ways of how that history becomes less painful, in that we need to be open about it and frank about it. And future generations need to know, and it needs to become a lesson for the future. I will leave it to Dr. Helga to maybe add to that. I think for now, that's where I'll stop. Thanks.
Anything, or leave it at that?
Well, I think that the problem exists not only in respect to Israel and Palestine, but it's a general problem, because history is written by the victorious powers, and they are always trying to readjust the memory of people and manipulate them. And it's really a major problem, which I think should be recognized and put out as a challenge to the class of historians all over the world to start a more active dialogue. I also think that the proposal by President Putin, which he made a couple of years ago, where he suggested that in respect to the reasons for World War II, all countries should open their archives and release the secret files of, who financed the coming to power of Hitler and similar things. And given the problem with history is that you always only know the tip of the iceberg, and only if historians dig deeply, then you find out that what people know as history generally is like 1%. But if you then look at the influence of diplomacy, of secret services, of secret negotiations, of background channels, all of this made results which in the look like an incident in history, that it's much more complicated. And I would just answer that what this question was asking should be made a general topic among historians. And for example, the BRICS countries have a very good structure of relations among universities, of programs of study. And I think that would probably be something which would be very useful to be integrated for the history faculties of the BRICS University Network.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
And we have
May I
a
add a
question.
quick comment?
Oh, sure.
A quick comment.
Sorry.
I agree with the comments of the previous panelists, and I want to add some of the perspective of my country, Belarus. We had 1/3 of our population killed during the Second World War. We suffered more than any other country of the former Soviet Union, any other country of Europe in that war. And although we have always considered the importance of the feat of the soldiers who liberated Europe from Germany, we didn't fully expose the things, the deeds, the atrocities that collaborators did. And this is one of the things that unfortunately led to the resumption, to the Nazism raising its ugly head nowadays and being spread all over Europe. So they say, historians say that although in the Second World War Nazi Germany was defeated, in reality Nazism was not defeated. It continued to live, it continued to be nourished, and now it's raising its head, and now it's spreading all over Europe, our countries, our neighbors. And we have to confront that. And that leads to other atrocities happening today. The atrocities that Nazi Germans committed, even in a more sophisticated way. So this tells this signifies the importance of spreading and preserving the historical truth. And this is exactly what we are doing today, with the participation, with the collaboration of other nations, primarily Russia, exactly looking through the archives, finding historical documents and revealing more truths about the war. It is hard, but it is necessary not to avoid the mistakes, some of the mistakes that have been made, and not to have these terrible things repeated. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Definitely a fight that needs to be fought in all nations, including the United States. We have a question from Belarus for the panel. What do you think? Wouldn't a BRICS involvement in the Palestinian issue, according to your model, lead to a greater confrontation between the global West and global South? Thanks a lot to all the speakers. So would anybody like to take that question?
I will make probably one general comment and leave to people who know the subject maybe more deeper to comment more on it. I think, and I take, I project that to other conflicts in the region. I think that as long as the parties, as long as the main stakeholders of the conflict agree to discuss and take the proposal, it works. So whether it's BRICS, whether it's other entity that makes a proposal, as long as the major parties are agreeing and are ready to accept the role of that intermediary, of that entity, that works just fine. But of course, it is a very complicated issue, and it's primarily up to the parties, or the managers, so to say, of the particular conflict. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll also indicate that there are several people that are asking specific questions about the financing and about the particulars of the project. Panel 2, which is called the Oasis Plan, the Physical Foundation for Economic Development of Southwest Asia, immediately occurs at the conclusion. We have about another 20 minutes for discussion right now, and then there will be about a half an hour break. And for those who have those particular questions, I would suggest that's where you should go. We have I'm sorry, Dr. Bakrie, you have your hand up. I didn't see it.
Yes. Yeah, I'd just like to remind us that actually we have to revisit the quartet. I think we have to remember, because Madame LaRouche just described something about the not only historical issue, but the archive is very important. Then it comes to my mind the issue of the quartet. I think the Quartet of the Middle East, which include the UN, the US, and the European Union and Russia, is actually established in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, in actually to mediate the Israel-Palestinian peace process. And is several steps been done, and the facilitating dialogue, negotiation, and this and that. But again, after this, there's no news about the quartet because of the anti-Russian sentiment. So I think again, because of now Russia and China is leading BRICS, I think it's time as well to revisit the quartet because the quartet in the 12 years or 14 years is doing something good. I think that's the point that we have to remember as well. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to insert here, we're getting a lot of questions, and we'll get to as many as we can, although we only have about 20 minutes. We want to insert here the statement from Graham Fuller because he wanted to see if there were some people in the panel that might respond to what he had presented. So if we can play that, this is a video statement.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be able to address the Schiller Institute conference on the Oasis Plan, which I think is really one of the more exciting and positive elements that has emerged in the Middle East for some time on the diplomatic level. I'd just like to make a few remarks on two levels. First, to suggest the very damaging geopolitical impact of several decades, if not even a century, of quite ugly geopolitics in the Middle East that has certainly contributed to the difficulty the region has had in getting together any kind of coherent plan for itself. It's interesting, you know, when we all listen to headlines over the years about this and that trouble in the Middle East, I think the popular question seems to arise, what is wrong with the Middle East anyway? Why is there all this? Why do we always have this constant conflict? Well, there's no single one answer, and every region has its own particular problems. God knows the West does as well, and Africa and Asia and South America. But it's interesting to note that the Middle East is really once the European powers in the late medieval period begin to feel their oats and a desire to expand and move, the Middle East is really the first land place that you hit as you move your forces beyond an attempt to extend your power. So in one sense, we can even go back to the Crusades as the first serious effort by the West to dominate the Middle East, and it really hasn't fully ceased since then. I think there is now greater ground for hope that we can perhaps implement a bold plan like the Oasis Plan, which involves water, land, resources of all kinds, oil and energy, and reshaping the entire region. I think there is a better chance now that we will not find quite a Cold War interfering in the same way as before. Certainly, the United States is anxious about China's rise in the world, and that's not going to change. The U.S. is sort of stuck now in a struggle against that rise, but nonetheless, there is no real ideological struggle in the sense that Mao Zedong in China or the Communist Party of Russia were promoting ideas of global communism. That is simply not the case. And we have, I think, a more relaxed international environment in the ideological sense. Russia, too, is now, many may argue about the entire Ukrainian conflict, but Russia is emerging as a new power now in a very different iteration, and surprisingly enough, receiving a great deal of sympathy and support from the emerging global South. and I would have to identify the global South, the new emerging global South, as yet one other truly major factor in the developing international situation. The Chinese Belt and Road, which is kind of part of the Oasis Plan or whatever you will, but the BRICS and the emergence of the BRICS, the countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and now being joined by many other important heavyweight players and economic players in the world, is changing that geopolitical situation as well. So I think there are new players in the game. It is no longer a two-way or even a three-way Cold War struggle. It's involving far more players with far more voice, far more confidence in themselves, in being able to speak out about the way the future world architecture should exist. And it's in that sense that I think I'm quite optimistic that we are looking at new factors and hopefully escaping from some of the very worst of the past. I just might add, and as a humorous aside, that one of the reasons why the Genghis Khan's Belt and Road or Eurasian plan was successful is that unfortunately he killed a great many people along the way to get them to join up with the plan. And indeed, after those people were killed, the plan did go on to succeed in quite a remarkable new emergence of a global Eurasia. So I guess the problem for the Schiller Institute is that it is not backed now by a Genghis Khan who can help kick ass and implement a highly worthwhile plan. But I hope that the overall wisdom of the plan and the new world situation will facilitate it, its implementation with or without a Genghis Khan. Thank you.
Before we went to that break, let me just say that Professor Toloraya had his hand up. I just briefly saw it. Is that correct?
No, that's just a residual hand, sorry.
Oh, it was a residual hand. Okay, fine. All right. We had a question from Zambia. I just want to make sure we ask this. And the question is it still justifiable for the International Court of Justice to maintain its arrest warrant, I think he means the ICC, by the way, to maintain its arrest warrant for President Putin when President Netanyahu continues to kill civilians in Gaza? And at what point do the courts intervene? So I think people get the idea of the questioner. Anybody have anything to say? Okay, I'll let that.
I will make a brief comment, if I may.
Sure, very good.
My country is also being blamed, and of course these charges are totally trumped up that we are sort of kidnapping and taking Ukrainian children against the will of their parents, against their own will. It is totally false. For 7 years from Ukraine proper, children of Donetsk and Lugansk have been bombed and killed between 2014 and 2022. And now, for some reason, they remembered about these children because it was probably politically beneficial for them, and decided that they are Ukrainian children, and decided that they are, taken against their will, so to say. Well, as for my country, we are taking some of the children for summer respite, to have rest, to have a break from the terrible situation that they live in under constant bombing. And of course, their parents give their permission, and the children always return to their place of residence. And some of them go to Belarus again. So we see no crime there. and it's just a political move in the absence of any other accusations to accuse my country and Russia. My president was not summoned, but you can expect anything by this International Criminal Court, but you can expect anything now, and there is no border of this injustice and craziness happening in the today's world. Of course, we are denying these accusations, and we provide the appropriate information to the authorities, and we have an information campaign and show what we are really doing. And the people who want to know the truth and understand the truth see it and make their own conclusions. So I would conclude saying that these charges are trumped up, and there are real atrocities and real violations of people happening, and many things that International Criminal Court can turn their eyes on exist. Not this particular one. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to ask one last question, which will come from Spain, and then I'm going to ask that give everybody a chance to say something as we wind up. We have to transition to our final panel. So this question comes from Juana in Spain. I think the Oasis Plan is a wonderful and inevitable project that sooner or later will have to be implemented. But isn't the unity of all the neighboring countries today subjected to chaos by Anglo interests also essential? Well, that's the question. So if no one wants to, Helga? Sure.
I think that is exactly what I think has the biggest chance to realize it, because if all the countries, the immediate neighbors of Israel and Palestine, but then also the countries who are in the larger environment, like, for example, I said earlier that I think one has to look at the entire region from India to the Mediterranean and from the Caucasus to the Gulf. That includes, Central Asian countries, that includes India, Pakistan, it includes, the Gulf states, and even Turkey and Egypt, who are sort of, bridges to Europe and Africa. They also have a voice. And if they would all speak with one voice and say, we want our region to be developed and peaceful, I think that would be a very strong counterweight to anybody who would want to disturb that. So my hope is that we take the proceedings of this conference to, and I would actually ask all the speakers and participants and watchers to take that and help us organizing that the concept of the Oasis Plan becomes so known to all the governments, to all the social and civil organizations, to all the businesses, to all the scientists, because I think we have to build a lobby, or I hate this word lobby, but to build a strong support coming from all the factors of the region. And then I think, given the fact that what is happening is so dangerous, that we may have a chance to put it on the agenda. And I still think to convene an emergency conference of all these countries because of the danger is not impossible.
Okay. So we're going to now begin to take concluding statements from everybody, just to make sure that there's nothing that you may have wished to say that you didn't have a chance to say. I'd like to begin with Dr. Bakrie. I think you may be muted.
Okay, I think thank you. My final statement is actually against, I think thank you, Madame LaRouche, for inviting us for this event. But again, I really pay attention to what Professor Philip Carl Salzman stated, that peace is not possible in the Middle East because of the anthropological or even the structure of the characteristic of the Middle East. I think that point is really important. And because of that, I think the next event, perhaps we can just invite a lot of anthropologists to talk about this, because again, we have to change that issue first before we really wish to gather to all this Muslim community or the regional in Southeast Asia countries as you wish. I think that's most important things. Second one, I think the archive. Again, we have to declare to people what is actually the real archive tell us, instead only of the history that made by the winner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shidlovsky.
Yes, of course, I'm grateful to the organizers, to Madame LaRouche for this initiative. These issues are extremely important for the world, for shaping world order, and we all hope for peaceful resolution of the conflict. And I think today's world lacks the voice of reason, the voice of common sense, the truth. And events like today's allow people to see a different perspective, to see what is really happening, to see the actual manifestation of voices of the people who want peace, who want prosperity in the world, who want a better world for future for our children. So it's extremely important from this point of view, and let us create the momentum and make a stronger point for the Oasis Plan and other peace initiative in Middle East and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us today. President Ramotar? Is he there? This video? Okay. Having a connection problem. So, Professor Toloraya.
Once again, I want to thank Dr. LaRouche and the Schiller Institute for organizing this important conference. I had a huge amount of new ideas and information, especially like the idea of international conference, but I would stress that it should be inclusive. And I'm thinking about BRICS. You know, BRICS is not anti-Western alliance, and you cannot really solve the problems without all the countries and all the actors being included. So, of course, any such international conference should include all the relevant actors, including, say, US and Western countries, and there some balance should be found through this diplomatic process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Sisulu.
Thank you to the organizers, Dr. Helga, and thank you to the chairperson. I think this has been a very useful conference, and I think you have ignited a lot of initiative I see in terms of the questions. So I think we should all continue to speak with one voice, and I think the Oasis Plan will ignite a lot of interest. And it can also be a tool to start peace negotiations between Palestine and Israel. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for being with us. And we want to just say on behalf of Schiller Institute, we very much appreciate what your nation did at the International Court of Justice. People of many, many countries do. And we're very, very happy that you were with us here today. I believe that President Ramotar is still frozen. Is that right? Okay, fine. So, Helga, we are going to you now for final remarks.
Well, first of all, I would like respectfully to disagree with Mr. Fuller, even if he's not here with us, when he said that he thinks that ideologies don't play a big role anymore, because while there is no Maoism and communism and all of these things, but there is a very big clash between the so-called rules-based order, the neoliberal order, and the so-called autocrats. I mean, I'm living in Germany, and you have no idea how autocratic the rules-based order has become. So it's actually an irony in itself, but it's really a big thing. And the vilification of countries who are accused to be autocrats is getting really absolutely unbelievably. So I just wanted to give that as a reply to Mr. Fuller. Otherwise, I also think that when the UN Security Council took place and the United States said that the decision was not binding, I was really not surprised, but I said, my God, where are we? If there is the idea that you can reject the decision of the admittedly highest gremium, which is the UN Security Council, and if that is no longer respected, and the UN Security Council is supposed to implement whatever the International Court of Justice is finding, then you're throwing out the entire international lawfulness, and you are thrown into a lawless world of jungle. And I think this is extremely dangerous. There is, however, one provision, and I heard what Professor Toloraya said in terms of the BRICS stepping in and building such a gremium. That is very welcome. But in the UN General Assembly, there is also the possibility that if the UN Security Council is not functioning, there is a provision which I think is called Uniting for Peace. I may be not entirely right, but there is a provision how you can move the discussion to the UN General Assembly. Now, my final point is I really think that given the fact that the fate of the entire human species is at stake, that is an issue which must be discussed in the UN General Assembly. And I personally think that we need to have more than anything else, such an international conference on a new security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia. Because when the Peace of Westphalia concluded 150 years of religious war in Europe, of which the 30 Years' War was just the culminating last phase, the people came together because they recognized that if they would not come to a conclusion, there would be nobody left alive to enjoy the result. Because at that point, 1/3 of everything was destroyed: villages, animals, people. Just 1/3 of everything was gone. And it was clear if the war would continue that nobody would be left alive to enjoy it. And today, where we are so close to the danger of nuclear war, as a matter of fact, that's what really worries a lot of people, that we have never been so close to both the situation around Ukraine, but also around Southwest Asia, could go out of control in a very short period of time. And therefore, it is really the existence of the entire species which is at stake. And that should motivate us, given the fact that we are hopefully the intelligent, creative species, the only one existing, at least we know, that we should come together and find a solution which is equitable and just for everybody. So I think the convening of such a conference and to really think what would be required to take care of the interests of every single country on the planet, in my view, is the most urgent question. And I would hope that that would be one of the results of this conference to spread this idea. And then the resolution of the Oasis conference would be one important part of it.
Thank you, Helga. I believe, do we have President Ramotar again? Are you there? We're just doing final statements, sir. So we wanted to make sure we didn't miss you.
Yeah, no, I think the plan is a very important one, but as I said just with my presentation, there are some elements of the plan that are also captured in the Belt and Road Initiative. But the plan is definitely one that is worthwhile to advocate for, because the thinking behind it is a very sound one and cannot be really be argued against. That it is vital to reinforce, to help bring about peace, and for itself to reinforce peace whenever we can really have that kind of peace that we all envisage that we can get. So I would probably leave it at that. I would say that's this direct connection between peace and development, and it is true that we cannot have one without the other, and that they help to reinforce each other, and that is one of the vital things that we constantly have to struggle for.
President Ramotar, Dr. Bakrie, Professor Toloraya, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche, we want to thank you all for being with us, and all of the others who were not able to stay on our platform, particularly our ambassadors from Palestine, Dr. Manuel Hassassian, and His Excellency Mounir Anastas. So we are going to now conclude our panel. The second panel, the Oasis Plan, the Physical Foundation for Economic Development of Southwest Asia, will begin shortly after 2:30, and we hope to see you there.